This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org, Patti and Doug Wood, and our network of experts from around the world with your weekly update on what is happening and what you need to know to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. Life has become an obstacle course as we try to navigate all the latest studies about toxins in the environment and adjust our lifestyles accordingly. This is especially true for young parents and parents-to-be as we learn more about how exposures even before conception can impact a new baby's life. Today, our show is called Plastic Baby because scientists like our guest today are finding tiny pieces of plastic in the placentas of new moms. These micro and nanoplastics are particularly worrying to scientists because they can get into parts of the body where they have no business. And new research is showing that they act as transporters of other toxins, carrying them along for the ride and giving them access to, again, areas where they have no business. Today, we'll talk with one of the scientists on the front lines of this research, and if you're pregnant or if you know someone who is, this is a show they should hear. That's all coming up in a few minutes, but first, some of the headlines from the world of environmental health. Patti, what do you got for us this week?
Well, a new European study has found that plastic pacifiers, even some of which were marked BPA-free, could nevertheless expose children to toxic chemicals. BPA, or bisphenol A, is an endocrine-disrupting compound widely used in plastics and resins and associated with metabolic, reproductive, and neurodevelopmental disorders. Infants and toddlers are particularly vulnerable because their detoxification capacity is immature and exposure typically occurs during a very sensitive developmental stage.
So these are things that said they were BPA-free and turned out to have BPA anyway?
That's right. While BPA is banned in infant feeding bottles, its use in pacifiers remains unregulated despite frequent BPA-free labeling. Just think about how many kids you see on the street in their strollers
with a pacifier
in their mouth.
Sure, yeah.
So of the 7 pacifiers tested, the one labeled as BPA-free released the highest amount of BPA.
Come on, really?
Yeah. Now, our listeners should know that silicone is a really, really good substitute for just a regular plastic pacifier.
I was going to ask you, what are people supposed to do?
But there's 2 types of silicone. There's platinum-cured silicone, which is what you want, and then there's peroxide-cured silicone. So the platinum-cured silicone is the highest grade silicone. It's got maximum purity, durability, no toxic byproducts, non-reactive, hypoallergenic, et cetera, et cetera.
So is that usually on the package so people can see that?
You have to find out from the manufacturer.
Oh, boy.
Because it's cheaper to use this peroxide-cured silicone. But you can also look for things like FDA grade. Okay, because FDA grade is the platinum-cured silicone.
Okay.
Okay. You can actually test it by pinching it or squeezing it or twisting it.
And
if it turns white, you know that it's got a filler in it, and that's the peroxide-cured silicone.
Huh.
So I think that that's important for people to know. You really,
good advice.
You want silicone, but you want platinum-cured silicone, FDA grade.
Good.
Yikes.
All right. Well, people who ate oatmeal for 2 days, you know I love oatmeal. People who ate oatmeal for 2 days experienced long-lasting reduction in LDL and total cholesterol levels in a clinical trial. Now, LDL is the bad type of cholesterol. The reduced levels of cholesterol remained in effect for 6 weeks after the 2-day diet. LDL levels were reduced by 10%, which is less than the amount that you might get with medication, but of course medication has its issues, and oatmeal has none of those issues. The 17 people who were eating the diet ate 300 grams of oatmeal per day. They were allowed to supplement the cereal with vegetables or fruit. Oatmeal eaters lost 2 kilograms of weight and saw a slight reduction in blood pressure immediately after the 2-day period. So, there you go.
There have been whispers of this oatmeal connection to heart health.
Oatmeal is the magic food.
For years and years and years.
It's the greatest. And
I know you do love it, yeah.
And it's so easy to make.
I know.
Get up in the morning, put
know.
A cup of oats and 2 cups of water in a pan, let it simmer while you take your shower and shave and whatever else. And, bingo, you come down, breakfast is ready. Put some raisins on it and apples and you're done.
And rolled oats are preferred. Organic rolled oats as opposed to quick oats, right? Which are almost like pre-chewed for you.
Yeah, that's awful. Yeah, they're terrible. Okay, anyway, that's my good news about oatmeal. What else you got?
President Trump has issued yet another executive order using the Defense Production Act to compel companies to manufacture more glyphosate.
I heard about this.
Yeah, this is the active ingredient in Roundup.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
This is a cancer-causing chemical.
Right, and this is the chemical that is figured in multiple lawsuits because of its links to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yep.
And glyphosate is the primary ingredient, as I just mentioned, in the weed killer Roundup.
Yep.
The move immediately set off alarms among supporters of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement and appeared to put Mr. Kennedy in an awkward position.
Yeah, he was one of the lawyers that argued a case against him in the first place.
In 2018, Mr. Kennedy helped win a landmark $289 million jury verdict against Monsanto, the maker of Roundup, contending that the company knew that the weed killer caused cancer.
And he won the case, and they paid the fine, and now what does he say?
Donald Trump's executive order puts America first where it matters most, our defense readiness and our food supply, Mr. Kennedy said in a statement. We must safeguard America's national security first because all of our priorities depend on it.
What are we going to do, load up our warships and our jet airplanes with glyphosate?
In his executive order, Mr. Trump declared that glyphosate was critical to the national defense.
Oh, come on.
The Defense Production Act provides a pathway for companies to be shielded from liability suits. And this executive order appeared to extend that protection to producers of glyphosate.
And there you go. And there's the reason for this executive order, is because they don't have to pay these lawsuits.
In a few weeks, the Supreme Court is set to hear arguments in a case about whether federal law shields pesticide manufacturers from such lawsuits. This is outrageous. And the crops that it is sprayed on so heavily, the soybeans, corn, and wheat, are GMO crops, right? Yeah. They've been sprayed for years.
And they're the backbone of junk food.
And they're the backbone of ultra-processed foods.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Patti.
You're welcome. We've been talking a lot recently about micro and nanoplastics and how they may be impacting our health. The logic is pretty straightforward. Plastic is made up of fossil fuels and chemicals, many of which are toxic to humans. Microscopic pieces of plastic also act as vectors, picking up other chemical hitchhikers along the way and giving them a free ride into our bodies. It's a recipe for trouble. This is especially concerning regarding chemicals that disrupt the endocrine system, since we know that the human endocrine system depends on very, very tiny amounts of chemicals that trigger important changes in our bodies.
Recently, scientists at the University of New Mexico announced they'd been able to identify tiny pieces of plastic in tissue from a human placenta. Dr. Marcus Garcia at the University of New Mexico Health Science Lab performed the experiments that made this discovery, and we caught up with him the other day. We started our conversation talking about his interest in human health and how it led to this discovery. Here's our discussion with Dr. Marcus Garcia.
For me, I have a big interest in reproductive health overall. Something that's a little bit different about me is I am actually a pharmacist by training. So, of course, looking at not only from a clinical aspect, but from the scientific standpoint, seeing a lot of the different types of health outcomes associated with reproduction over the last couple of years has really been increasing, not only from the male perspective, but also from the female perspective. So that's one of the big things. And where I see a lot of my research going forward is looking at not only what's happening during gestation, so what's happening to the mom, but also what's happening to the babies. And in a lot of ways, how these microplastics may be playing a role in that. So there's been a big push in the reproductive health sector in terms of microplastics research to be able to really answer a lot of these questions. And for the placenta, we wanted to be able to see if there was any plastics available. And we also developed a new technique to adequately isolate these microplastics from biological tissues and not only pull the microplastics from the micro scale, but also on the nanoscale, and be able to be the first group to show a technique to adequately quantify those microplastics.
Okay, one of the things that we really need to find out is the source of these exposures. I know that you can actually tell what type of plastic it is, whether it's polyethylene or nylon or whatever, PVC even. Is there a way to determine the source in general terms?
So that is a very interesting point, and that's something that's really been kind of the big question, with a lot of the new papers that have come out. They've been talking about plastic contamination in your water bottles. So yes, you are getting some particles from that as well. And it's actually estimated that we have 1 ton of plastics per every single individual on this planet right now. So just kind of bring that into perspective. It's really gone beyond just stopping plastic production. I mean, of course, we always recommend if there's any ways to use glassware or reduce some of your own plastic use around the house. I mean, that's just going to help in small ways, but big thing is looking at the environment. As that bottle or any of that plastic material enters into a landfill, that's when it starts to degrade over time and become these microplastics. Kind of following the trail with that, those break down, end up leaching into our water, our groundwater. They're small enough to where on windy days they can end up in our air as well too. Then this water ends up being used like for irrigation, for example. They use that for our crops. Our plants actually end up absorbing those, moving on around the cycle. We then see our livestock consuming those, and then just based off of what we consume, plants, animal products, things along those lines, it ends up in all of those, and that's how it ends up in us. So it's gone beyond the point of like, oh, if we stop production today, there's still going to be that growth of microplastics just because of how much is in the environment moving forward. So it's estimated that microplastics doubles every 10 to 15 years. So I know we're looking at trying to investigate and look at studies to look at different cohorts along those time frame periods to be able to answer and look at, are we actually seeing that trend of accumulation within our tissues, as well as even just like overall animal products as well too, like looking at, as we see not only within like an urban environment, but there's a lot of research out there where even in very remote places, they're able to identify microplastics presence as well too. So just being able to look and answer a lot of those questions is important.
So you started talking about its impact on reproduction. So we find the plastics. Do we know what might be in those plastics that could be affecting reproduction? Or is that your next step? I mean, am I getting ahead of?
Yeah, so those are the next steps that we're looking at. Initially with this study was being able to adequately quantify and give a definitive saying like, yes, these plastics are present and the amount of plastics that we are seeing. So that's kind of the important thing, is being able to answer that question. And then, like I said, is like keeping all the other information about like the mothers as well as these babies, having all that information available, what areas they're living in the specific area where these samples were collected. And then using that information to answer a lot of these. I mean, looking at, is there any type of comorbidities that there may be or things along those lines? I mean, for this first study, these were all normal childbirths, everything. But as we move forward, we're definitely going to look to answer those questions. We're also going to be looking into many different tissues as well, too. So looking at overall accumulation and trying to bridge that gap to identify what type of health outcomes are associated with that, whether it be leading to some types of comorbidities or for individuals who may already have these comorbidities, how is that impacting their health outcomes associated with that? Because a big thing in this field is the dose makes the poison. Again, we're looking to identify at what level or what dose that would be that is going to be detrimental or that we need to really pay a close attention to. But those are going to be questions that we're still working towards. But I feel like we're on a good trajectory as a whole, not only with our group here at UNM, but throughout all the groups that are putting out a lot of microplastics research. I think that we're really trying to have those questions answered so that way us as humans can have the best information so we can make conscious decisions about our own health.
So I was reading an article about your research, and a couple of times you mentioned how you were looking at an organ that was, 8 months old, right? And was never going to get older than that. And you were pretty alarmed by the amount of nano and microplastics found in that organ. How do you extrapolate that and, talk about what might be in other organs in the body that have been there since people were born, right?
Yeah. That's a great question. Of course, with publications, sometimes certain ones take longer than others just through the review process and everything as well. So as we were developing the placenta work, we also were working on looking at a dosing model within a mouse model to be able to look at the equivalent dose that we're seeing from human consumption on a weekly basis And then be able to identify, like, are we actually seeing these microplastics translocating from the GI tract into these organs as well. And we used a range from 1 micron to all the way up to relatively large microplastic particles, which were on the 5 micron scale. So surprisingly with that, just over a 4-week period that we did this exposure, we were able to see that crossing into these other tissues. So liver, kidney, we also were able to identify that in the brain of these mice as well too. So just to kind of show over a 4-week period how much accumulation can occur, I think that that's going to be something to really hone in on more for that lifetime chronic exposure of these microplastics, and even understanding more of the mechanism as to, is there something else that it may not just be translocation, because as we know, we have that systemic circulation. Once they enter the blood, that's one of the ways to enter into all these other tissues. But also too is fat playing a role in that, and how we metabolize that. Those are still a lot of questions that we're looking to answer, and that might be something to really pay attention to in terms of looking at that chronic exposure as well.
You're looking at chemicals that might be in those plastics that are lipophilic.
Potentially, yes.
Yes. Okay.
So were you surprised, Marcus? I mean, when you did the centrifuge, did you run around the lab saying, "Look what I got," or were you expecting it? Or tell me about that.
So I think with everything, you have your hypotheses that you create, and we were under that idea is like, well, let's see what we get. Mm-hmm. And of course, too, as we continue to grow within this research, there's always going to be little tweaks that we need to make to all of our techniques to make them as best as possible. But we're pretty happy with the direction that our technique is going, and the data that it's coming with is giving us pretty high yields that we can really feel strongly about.
Can you talk a little bit about, just in layman's terms for our radio audience, talk a little bit about how you actually did it, the process, I mean, for our lay audience?
So ultimately, in more of like the lay terms, what we do is we'll take a piece of any type of tissue, and what we do is we take that and we put it in a potassium hydroxide solution. And what that'll do is it'll completely degrade or break down all of the biological tissues around. So we usually put that in for about 3 days, and we put it in an incubator at 40 degrees Celsius. After that 3-day period, it's just pretty much just a liquid, all digested. And then what we do is we take that out and we put it in an ultracentrifuge. We spin that as fast as 100,000 Gs for a 4-hour period. And what it does is you still are going to have what we call our supernatant, or like the liquid phase of everything. But what it does is, because it's so fast, it's going to pull all of the material that's left. So predominantly all of that polymer. And then with this technique being at that speeds, not only is it pulling the micro scale polymers, but it's also pulling from the nano as well too, which is very important to be able to catch as well as use to be able to identify how much is present.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then from there, what we do with that is we take that, because it'll palletize, so we'll have like a little piece of pallet of plastics at the bottom, and then we run it through what we call pyrolysis, which we heat up that sample to 600 degrees Celsius and run it through a gas chromatography mass spec, which over a 45-minute period separates out and creates this peak within our analysis. And then based off of those peaks, we relate that back to a known standard concentration of these polymers. And that's how we're able to identify, one, what type of plastics it is, overall amount, and then normalize that to the amount of tissue that we're analyzing to give us the information that we have.
So we have people calling and saying, I was so worried about PFAS and 1,4-dioxane and, chromium-6 in my water. I was using reverse osmosis to eliminate those chemicals so that my children are not drinking them. And so now we find out from the research that was done at Columbia using this dual laser technology when they were looking at the water in these 16-ounce bottles, that some of those microplastics are actually coming off the plastic filters in the RO systems. Mm-hmm. So it's like people are really pretty freaked out about this.
Yeah.
So how do you personally feel about this, knowing, exactly what's going on in our bodies and how ubiquitous these plastic particles are?
Mm-hmm. So it does raise a lot of concerns. Now, of course, until we know at what concentrations are causing more of these health outcomes, That's where I try and educate people who are interested in learning a little bit more about microplastics and what we do. Is yes, this is something that is a real thing and is happening, but don't want to cause panic in any types of ways. Like that's part of what we want to do as researchers, is answer those questions and really identify, like, is there a certain amount of these plastics that our body is able to clear, or at a certain level may not be as toxic to our bodies. So as I think you hit it perfect by saying, they are ubiquitous within our environment. They're not going away anytime soon. But we also want to be able to know how we're going to be able to live with these in our environment, how we can work to eliminate some of it as well too, and learn about how our body is processing them, looking at, again, where are we having toxic effects, and when that does happen, what can we do, not only from a scientific perspective, but also a clinical perspective, and even further, like more on an environmental perspective, is there certain policies that we can use this data to put in place to be able to better handle the waste that's already in our environment as well too. So there's still a lot of things that we're trying to move forward, and it's going to be a slow process in certain avenues, but I feel like the direction that we're going with our group, we're moving at a faster pace than a lot are expecting. So I'm excited to be able to say, like, some of the research that's going to be coming out of the University of New Mexico is going to be very insightful, and not only from one specific organ of interest, but we are looking from a whole body perspective as well as an environmental perspective to be able to help answer a lot of those questions.
So,
Cool.
It's tough working in the political arena on this because, the industries are so powerful, and, they have deep pockets, and the off-ramp for the fossil fuel industry right now is to just create more plastic manufacturing plants and get, much more heavily involved in the petrochemical industry, as we're replacing burning fossil fuels with electric cars and geothermal systems and solar and, wind and so on. So we always say, well, these executives also have children and grandchildren. So yeah, this is a.
It's why the work is so critical, Patti, and
yeah, it's just
Marcus,
critical what you're doing.
I'm sure you know this.
Absolutely critical what you're doing,
and exciting.
I'm really glad to be able to bring a lot of insights into this research. To be a part of it has been very exciting, especially over the last couple of years. I mean, we go to annual conferences, and just to see how much work in the land of microplastics research, every year I feel like it doubles, or it's just, we're seeing more and more things coming out. And I'm just excited for the direction and being able to answer a lot of these questions, because, again, like we've talked about in this interview, there's so many critical points that are still unanswered, and we really are working to be able to do that. And ultimately, the biggest thing is being able to make that conscious decision for our own personal health, but ultimately our environment. I mean, we're nothing without the environment that we're around, and I mean, our world is so beautiful as it is. So any ways that we can work to keep it that way, and it not only starts with us as a whole, but also just think about how microplastics are affecting our plant life, how it's affecting our animal life, and literally everything around us, and those are the key things that I think we keep in mind, and we really want to make sure that this information is out there for individuals to learn more about and be able to work that into how we make our environment safe and clean for that next generation as well.
So I just have three quick questions at the end. It was a pretty wow statement that you made early on, saying 1 ton of plastic for every individual on the planet. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so there's been some data out that the World Health Organization has put when they were first looking at like overall microplastics production, accumulation as well. And there's actually been quite a few studies out there who have looked at estimating those amounts. So that's what we've been able to calculate. And then two, just looking at how production has ramped up and where that's probably going to continue to do. So
So probably before you were out of elementary school, I do a lot of environmental education, and I created a program about 20-some years ago called I'll Have the Plastic Fish Special, Please. And, it's a 7th grade program. The 7th graders know everything, right? So they said, what is this lady going to come in and talk to us? What is plastic fish special, blah, blah, blah. Right. So it was it was a cradle to grave discussion about, what plastic is made from, fossil fuels and chemicals, blah, 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 blah. And then the plastics manufacturing plants have these what we call sacrifice zones around those areas because of the contamination of their water and their air and soil and so on. And then eventually, we talked about the gyres in the oceans. And these gyres, had all this floating plastic, which was not just floating, but also went into the depths of the ocean in those areas. And scientists at that time, 25 years ago, were already saying we are taking tissue samples from seabirds and fish and sea mammals, and we are finding plastic, which is obviously, why I came up with the title of I'll Have the Plastic Fish Special, Please.
Is there a question there?
Yeah, the question is, what has accelerated this research?
Yeah.
Because it's been around for a while, but why the unbelievable, just fast-paced research on this now?
Yeah, so I think you made a great point. Is of course all of this really started with seeing the pollution that was occurring within our oceans, seeing that overall accumulation, and then continuing on to be able to look and see within our aquatic life, seeing that there was those plastics present in their tissues as well too. So I think, granted they live in that water and have certain ways as to where they're and where those plastics are entering their bodies as well. So I think with that, it really started to open the eyes of individuals. Well, if it can get into those types of tissues, what can it do to us? So I think that's where part of it has really started to look more on a human perspective, or even just within like the land environment perspective. And I think too, as we're learning a little bit more about plastics, technology has really advanced significantly over the last couple of years, which has really played a key role in being able to look at microplastics research. The hardest thing is being able to look on the micro and nano scale. A lot of microscopes and things have limitations in terms of how far down they can look, as well as even looking at some of the infrared or new technology that we're using now has really played a key role in being able to continue moving forward and look a lot easier into that micro and nano scale. So I think that's been the biggest thing, is just such the advance in technology. And then too, just again, like seeing how there is such an accumulation, not only within our oceans, but throughout the world. I think that's really been a key driver into saying, like, as we're seeing this accumulation, what is that leading to? And I think that's the big question. And as we're seeing, there is some environmental aspects that are being affected. So we just want to continue to build that technology, build on what we're already learning and what we're already publishing. And I mean, just to kind of see what's going to be coming in terms of research in the next year is going to be very exciting, but also just to see the direction that this is going within the next 5 to 10 years. And what kind of changes that may make is also going to be very exciting to see.
Dr. Marcus Garcia at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences talking about microplastics in newborn babies. You can read Dr. Garcia's study on our program website, greenstreetnews.org, where you'll also find links to all of the news stories we covered this week. That's going to do it for this edition of Green Street. Patti and I will be back next week. Thanks for listening.